At 8:17 on a bright Tuesday morning, a single father named Marcus Vale stood on the sidewalk in a borrowed suit, watching the most important job interview of his life disappear behind the closing doors of a glass office tower. He had spent 3 weeks preparing for that interview. He had rehearsed every answer after putting his 6-year-old daughter to bed. He had ironed the same white shirt 3 times because the collar was beginning to fray. He had even borrowed a pair of polished shoes from his neighbor. This job could have changed everything. It could have paid their overdue rent, put groceries in their empty refrigerator, and given his daughter, Nora, the kind of childhood that did not involve hearing her father whisper to landlords after midnight. But as Marcus watched the clock tick toward 8:30, he heard a desperate cry from across the street, and without knowing it, he was about to make a choice that would change his life forever. If you believe kindness can create second chances, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe to Hardworking Dad for more stories about courage, sacrifice, and the people who refuse to give up. Marcus had learned not to expect life to be fair. 3 years earlier, his wife had passed away unexpectedly, leaving him alone with a newborn daughter and a mountain of bills. Since then, he had worked wherever someone was willing to hire him. He delivered packages during the day, repaired broken appliances when neighbors called, and washed dishes at a small restaurant on weekends. He slept little, complained rarely, and smiled whenever Nora entered the room because he never wanted her to see how frightened he sometimes was. That morning, however, he had allowed himself to believe that things might finally change. The position at Westbridge Technologies was an operations coordinator job, not a glamorous executive role, but it offered stable hours, health insurance, and enough money to keep a roof over their heads without counting every coin. Marcus had made it through the first round of interviews, and the final interview was scheduled for 8:30 that morning with the company's chief executive officer. He left home before sunrise, kissed Nora on the forehead, and promised her he would be back before school pickup. She had slipped a tiny paper star into his jacket pocket and told him it was for luck. Marcus had laughed and promised he would keep it there all day. But on the way to the office, his bus broke down 2 miles from downtown. He ran the rest of the way, holding his folder against his chest as sweat formed beneath his collar. When he finally reached the towering glass building, he was only 5 minutes late. He was breathing hard but smiling because he thought he had made it. Then, just before he could cross the street, he saw an elderly woman stumble beside a parked car. Her handbag fell open, papers scattered across the pavement, and she collapsed to her knees. People walked around her. Cars honked. One man glanced over his shoulder and kept going. Marcus looked at the building, then at the woman. His interview was already beginning. He knew what he should do if he wanted the job. Keep walking. Someone else would help her. That was what the practical part of his mind screamed. But then the woman tried to stand and nearly fell again. Marcus ran toward her. He gathered her papers, helped her sit safely on a bench, and asked if she needed an ambulance. She insisted she was fine, but her hands were shaking badly. Marcus noticed that one document appeared to be an important medical form, so he carefully placed everything back into her handbag. When she struggled to breathe, he stayed beside her until her breathing steadied. He didn't know that every minute he spent helping her was another minute his interview was slipping away. At 8:42, Marcus finally called the company receptionist. His voice was quiet as he explained what had happened. He apologized repeatedly and asked whether there was any possibility of rescheduling. The receptionist sounded sympathetic but said the hiring executive had a packed schedule. Marcus thanked her anyway. Then he looked at the elderly woman, who was now sitting calmly and holding her handbag against her chest. She looked at him with tears in her eyes and thanked him for staying when everyone else had walked away. Marcus smiled and told her she didn't need to thank him. He simply couldn't leave her there. What Marcus didn't know was that the woman had been watching him carefully. Her name was Celeste Arden. And she was not a stranger. She was the CEO of Westbridge Technologies. Marcus returned home that afternoon with his borrowed suit wrinkled, his shoes dusty, and his hopes almost gone. Nora ran into his arms the moment he opened the door. She had made him a paper crown from construction paper because she believed her father was going to get the job. Marcus hugged her tightly and fought back tears. He couldn't bring himself to tell her that he had missed the interview. Instead, he asked about school and helped her with her homework. Later that night, after Nora fell asleep, Marcus sat alone at the kitchen table beneath a weak yellow light. He took the little paper star from his pocket and placed it beside his phone. There were $17 in his bank account. The landlord had left another notice under the door. The refrigerator hummed almost empty. For the first time in years, Marcus allowed himself to cry. He didn't cry because he had helped someone. He cried because he was exhausted from constantly having to choose between being a good man and being a provider. He wondered how many times a person could do the right thing before life finally punished them for it. The next morning, at 7:15, his phone rang. Marcus almost didn't answer. A woman's voice on the other end calmly asked if she was speaking to Marcus Vale. When he confirmed it, she said she was calling from Westbridge Technologies. Marcus immediately assumed they wanted to formally reject him. He straightened his back and prepared himself for disappointment. Instead, the woman said the CEO would like to meet him personally at 10 o'clock. Marcus froze. He arrived at Westbridge an hour later wearing the same borrowed suit. He was escorted into a conference room overlooking the city. A few seconds later, the door opened. The woman from the sidewalk walked in. Marcus stared at her in disbelief. She smiled gently and introduced herself as Celeste Arden, CEO of Westbridge Technologies. Marcus suddenly remembered the elderly woman he had helped. His face turned pale. He realized the truth all at once. Celeste told him she had intentionally traveled to the office that morning without her usual security and assistance because she wanted to see how people treated someone they believed had no power. She had been testing something she never discussed publicly, whether her company still understood the human qualities it claimed to value. She had not expected to nearly faint on the sidewalk, and she certainly hadn't expected the man who was supposed to interview with her to sacrifice his opportunity to help a stranger. Marcus shook his head and said he hadn't known who she was. Celeste replied that was precisely why his actions mattered. But she didn't immediately offer him the job. Instead, she asked him why he had stayed. Marcus looked down at his hands and answered honestly. He said he knew what it felt like to need someone and have everyone else walk past. After his wife died, there had been days when he carried his daughter through hospital corridors and felt invisible. A nurse, a neighbor, and a complete stranger had once helped him when he was at his lowest. He said he had never forgotten what it felt like to receive kindness when he had nothing to offer in return. So when he saw Celeste on that sidewalk, he simply couldn't walk away. The room became silent. Celeste looked at him for a long moment and then placed a folder on the table. Inside was a formal employment offer. Marcus stared at the number printed on the page. It was more than he had expected. The position came with health insurance, paid leave, and a salary that would allow him to finally stop choosing between groceries and bills. His hands began to tremble. But Celeste wasn't finished. She told him that she had also spoken to the hiring team about his qualifications. His previous work experience showed unusual problem-solving skills, reliability, and leadership under pressure. The only thing missing from his resume was a corporate title. And sometimes, she said, a title tells you what someone has done, but character tells you who they are. Marcus accepted the offer with tears in his eyes. Months later, everything began to change. He moved Nora into a small but comfortable apartment with sunlight streaming through the windows. He bought groceries without calculating every item. He enrolled Nora in an after-school art program because she loved drawing. For the first time, Marcus came home from work tired in a good way, not the kind of exhaustion that came from wondering whether tomorrow would be worse. But the greatest change wasn't financial. It was inside him. Marcus no longer believed that kindness was a luxury poor people couldn't afford. He discovered that kindness was often the one thing people could give even when they had almost nothing else. One afternoon, several months after he started at Westbridge, Marcus saw a young employee sitting alone outside the building, visibly upset. The employee had just been rejected for a promotion and was staring at his phone with tears in his eyes. Marcus sat beside him. He didn't give a lecture. He didn't offer empty motivational words. He simply stayed. Because Marcus remembered the sidewalk. He remembered the cold pavement. He remembered the people who walked past. And he remembered the stranger who had eventually become the person who gave him his second chance. Celeste watched from the office window that afternoon and smiled. She knew she hadn't hired Marcus because he had missed an interview. She had hired him because when life gave him every reason to keep walking, he stopped. Years later, Nora would tell people that her father taught her the most important lesson she ever learned. She said that being successful wasn't about becoming important enough for people to notice you. It was about becoming kind enough to notice people others ignored. And Marcus never forgot that little paper star. He kept it inside his desk drawer at Westbridge, folded and slightly worn, a reminder of the morning he thought he had lost everything. Sometimes, what feels like the worst mistake of your life is actually the moment your life begins to change. Marcus thought he had missed his chance because he stopped to help a stranger. In reality, stopping was the reason his chance found him. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes good people still exist, and subscribe to Hardworking Dad. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a little hope today. And before the story ends, I want you to do something special. Comment, kindness always comes back, if you believe that doing the right thing is worth it, even when nobody is watching. Because sometimes, the person you stop to help may never be able to repay you. Sometimes, they may not even know your name. But kindness has a strange way of traveling through the world. And one day, when you least expect it, the door you thought had closed forever may open again, not because you were lucky, but because you chose to be human when it mattered most.